Where are firms most vulnerable when it comes to a compliance standpoint? To break it all down for us, I'm joined by Lori Weston of Compliance Advisor to learn more. Lori, thanks so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So I know compliance can sometimes get a little bit of a bad rap, mostly out of folks have a lot of fears around it and making sure that they get it right. So let's quell some of those today. But let's start by talking about where are firms most vulnerable from a compliance standpoint and what should be RAs be focusing on moving forward?
What we're really seeing trending today from a compliance concern would be around AI. That's the buzz, right? It's an emerging topic. Firms really have to consider what policy they're going to adopt around it. So we advise our advisors or our clients to take a look at where AI is creeping into their operations. Who's using it at their firm? You might have adopted a policy and you might have trained your staff on that policy, but do you really know every area that AI might be creeping in? Are your employees using it even to craft an email? Maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. So you want to interview all of your employees in a friendly way, right? Hey, show me how you're using AI, and then be flexible around your policy, enforce your policy, but then be sure that you are reviewing those policies on a periodic basis because this is such an emerging area, and then consider amending your policy as needed to provide more flexibility, and then just be firm on those adopted policies.
I love that advice around being flexible, especially because we are such in a digital and tech forward environment now. So things like AI or even the bring your own device that a lot of firms are struggling with. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this in the compliance space, but I've talked to tons of firms and everyone seems to have a different mentality or adoption around the rules for that. And that's what makes it so challenging within our space because it's really at the firm level. There's no blanketed policy necessarily for things like that. So it's on the firm to protect their advisors and ultimately their clients at the end of the day. Because heck, you don't want somebody dropping client data into Chat GPT, and next thing you know, it's out there in the ether. So we're in interesting times, and it's encouraging though that compliance and regulation is really at the forefront. So what are some of the biggest compliance traps firms don't even realize that are happening inside their organizations?
So besides AI, right, and interviewing your staff and understand where it's being used, you touched on another one, which is texting, right? So that electronic communications and the capture of electronic communications, you think maybe people wouldn't be as concerned with the new administration. They will focus on more fraudulent, right, more bad actors. You still have to comply with the rules, right? The regulations, the books and records requirements to retain those. You've got to review those communications to supervise your supervised persons, look for client complaints, etc. When it comes to texting, though, it's still is it a BYOD? Is it do we have a second phone? I think a lot of advisors groan when they hear that, but that's an option. I think advisors really need to look at the different technologies, the different solutions. There are more and more vendors that are making that a little bit easier. You might be able to have the same phone. You might even be able to have the same app on the same phone and different groups, client group versus a friend or, your personal contacts. That makes it a little bit easier.
You've actually written extensively about the distinctions between state and SEC registration. Are state regulations really that different than what the SEC is offering up? What should an advisor who might be facing a switch from state to SEC or SEC to state even be looking for?
Yeah, advisors that are either hovering on the border between the threshold of being SEC or state registered, or advisors that are just over the 100 million might want to consider looking at where their clients are, where they might have to register, and looking at the various regulations in those states to prepare for a potential need to become a multi-state advisor. Areas where there are definitely differences, Form CRS would be an obvious one. There are actually two states that do require Form CRS, but most states do not require Form CRS. It's an SEC requirement, so that's a client disclosure area. Advisory agreements would be another one. It's not in the Advisors Act. You're not required to have an agreement with your client, but there are certain things that have to be in writing: discretionary authority, your fees, your advisory fees. So, of course, advisors have agreements, but states go beyond that. Many states require written agreements. And not only that, they go beyond that, and there are certain provisions that are required in those agreements that are not, that federally registered advisors are not subject to. There are a number of areas, BCP or business continuity being another one. NASA has adopted model rules for things like BCP. There's an area of custody that differs from the SEC, and advisors needing to provide statements to clients reflecting their advisory fees. So there are a number of areas that the regulations or the topic is the same: custody, advertising, like I said, disclosures, right? Client, all of those areas. There are a number of areas where the topic is the same, but the actual regulation is different, and the states go deeper or have more stringent requirements than the SEC.
Well, I appreciate you breaking down the distinctions because it can get very complicated very quickly. So to bring it all home here, then, Lori, what are the biggest compliance priorities REA should be focusing on today and in the coming year?
Yeah. Well, really, we touched on that first one, AI. It's emerging. Stay on top of it. When the exam priorities, the SEC exam priorities do come out, we expect cryptocurrency or digital assets to be in there. Certainly, Reg SP is a buzz right now. We've got a looming deadline. And AML, it was pushed back, but we still expect it to go, into 2028. We expect advisors to need to comply with AML as well. So those are a number of areas that are still hot topics, really, that advisors need to be preparing for.
All right. So for all those advisors listening, then this is a very important conversation and obviously not something that can be overlooked, especially with the landscape that we're in. So, Lori, thank you so much for your perspective and insights.
Thank you for having me.
For wealthmanagement.com, I'm Shannon Rosic.